Well, it's official. The government finally made me lose my marbles. Well, more specifically, they made me delete some videos where I used marbles to show you how preferential voting works in the Australian electoral system. Not because there was anything wrong with the videos, but because they lacked the so-called authorisation statement on the end. You know, that little bit at the end of every political ad that sounds like this?
Authorised by John Humphries for the Liberal Democratic Party, Mount Waverley, Victoria.
Yeah. I didn't put one of those on because I wasn't running for Parliament at the time and I didn't think it was necessary, but because it wasn't there, I had to take it down because, you know, without an authorisation statement, I mean, people might not know who was making this video. Because apparently having my face and my voice and my name on a TV in the background isn't enough to tell you, the Australian voting public, who is behind this video. So my name's Topher Field, this is my replacement video, there will be an authorisation at the end, and I'm going to show you how preferential voting works in the Australian system, first in the lower house, then in the Senate. Let's get started. What I have in front of me is a whole bunch of fictional political parties in a fictional seat. Liberal Party, Labor Party, 4 different freedom-friendly minor parties. We'll talk about those in a sec. The Greens, and 1 lonely independent. These marbles all represent votes, and they are currently placed in what's known as the first preference. So in other words, when you get the ballot paper, you put a number 1 next to one of their parties. That's where these votes are right now, in the number 1 spot. The way they get counted is this. The party with the lowest votes gets eliminated, and their votes get distributed to the voters' preferences. That's why it's called preferential voting. In this case, because they're the very first ones to be eliminated, that's the number 2 spot. So, what we have here is 3 fictional hypothetical votes, and I'm going to assume that this was a left-leaning independent of some sort, and that the number 2 preference for one of them probably went to Labor, and for the others probably went to the Greens. All right? So left-leaning independent didn't get a lot of support, they get eliminated, but their votes are still in play, helping out through their preferences. Now it so happens that that little bit of extra support for the Greens, as they've picked up those preferences, is just enough to give them slightly more votes than this hypothetical freedom-friendly minor party. So what happens now is the order gets changed. You see how that works? As we collect the preferences into the various parties, these stickers are getting old now. It's been a while since I made the first video. As we collect the preferences into the various parties, the order may change. And after that order change is when we find out who gets eliminated next. That's important. It's going to be crucial later on. Now we have one of the freedom-friendly minor parties. They have the lowest number of votes. Now let's talk about who these are. These are all of the parties, for my purposes for this election, these are all of the parties that are opposed to ongoing vaccine mandates, ongoing COVID shutdowns, and ongoing monitoring of the Australian people. If they can cross that simple threshold, then I'm happy to classify them for the purposes of this election as freedom-friendly minor parties. That includes people like my own party, the Liberal Democrats, where I'm the lead Senate candidate in Tasmania, but it also includes UAP, One Nation, and a whole bunch of other smaller parties, GAP and IMOP and A1, and there's a whole plethora of them. You need to find out who is in your electorate. So that's what these 4 parties represent. In no particular order, is just 4 of those freedom-friendly minor parties. Now, unfortunately, one of them is about to be eliminated. It happens. So all of these votes get distributed to the next preferences. Now this one here looks a little bit different. This one here, I'm saying that this one's our vote and that we were smart about the way that we voted. We didn't just vote for one freedom-friendly minor party, the one that we liked the most. No. We voted number 1 for the freedom-friendly minor party that we liked the most. We voted number 2 for the next one that we liked the next most, number 3 for the next one, 4 for the next one, and we didn't vote for anybody else until we had numbered every single one of the freedom-friendly minor parties. Don't vote for one freedom-friendly minor party and then give your vote to the majors. We'll see what that looks like in a second. So this is our vote. We were smart, and it so happens that the party that we put second as our second preference happens to be this one. Okay, that's just how it happened to work out. Now, all of these voters, many of them were also smart. They voted for other freedom-friendly minor parties in no particular order. But these guys here, they didn't watch this video. They didn't understand the importance of voting for all of the freedom-friendly minor parties rather than just one. And so they voted 1 for this hypothetical freedom-friendly minor party, and then they voted number 2 for Labor or maybe for the Liberal Party. And that's it. Their votes are gone. They've gone straight to the major parties. But the people that were smart enough to put other freedom-friendly parties in 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th place, their votes are still in play. And that's crucial, as we're about to see. Now, it so happens that none of the orders changed as a result of that particular distribution of preferences. We're still in the same order. So now it is this freedom-friendly minor party that gets eliminated. It so happens that our vote goes to this guy, and these guys, these voters, were all pretty switched on, and a huge proportion of their votes go to the other freedom-friendly minor parties through preferences. Now we're on to the third place preferences in some cases. But a handful didn't know what they were doing, and they ended up giving their next preference to one of the major parties. It's a problem, but it happens. Now, it so happens that because of the gathering of preferences into this freedom-friendly minor party, that now they overtake the Greens. Boop. There we go. The Greens now are the next to get eliminated because voters were smart and they gave their preferences to all of the freedom-friendly minor parties. Now the Greens get eliminated. We can assume with a fairly high degree of confidence that most of these votes are going to end up in the Labor Party. It's just how it's going to go. Most people that vote Green are going to put the Labor Party ahead of the Liberal Party. Some of them will actually vote for freedom-friendly minor parties like the Liberal Democrats because they recognise that we're the ones that stand up for human rights these days. And believe it or not, many Green supporters are very concerned about human rights. You might not know that. You might not believe that given the way the modern Greens Party works. But if you go back 30 years and look at how they started, they were a human rights party. Not anymore. So they're looking for a new home. And hey, if you're one of those voters, come and have a look at us at the Liberal Democrats. You'll find that we are the human rights party that you're looking for. So a handful of votes might end up in one or two of the freedom-friendly minor parties, but the vast majority of Greens' preferences go straight to the Labor Party, and that now puts them in the lead. And so here we are with 4 to go. We've got Labor, Liberal, and 2 of the freedom-friendly minor parties. And here is where the magic happens. Because people use their preferences correctly, the vast majority of the votes from this freedom-friendly minor party will end up in this one. Now, there's a few that won't. There's a few people that didn't see this video or maybe didn't pay attention or just didn't care. So there's a few votes that end up with one or other of the major parties. But the vast majority end up with the other freedom-friendly minor party. Voila. Now, what this does, this is the magic of the system. All of a sudden, we have to reorder these according to who is highest and who is lowest now, after the preferences have been distributed up to this point. What that means is that the freedom-friendly minor party, thanks to the gathering and the collecting of all of the votes from the other freedom-friendly minor parties, have now come over the top of the Liberal Party. So with 3 to go, here's the key. With 3 to go, we need a freedom-friendly minor party to be in second place, or first ideally, but they don't even have to be first. They just need to be in second, because here's what most Liberal voters do. If you're a Liberal voter, you put Liberal at the top, you put Greens and Labor at the bottom, and you put everyone else in between. If you're a Labor voter, you put Labor at the top, maybe Greens next, Liberal at the very bottom, and everyone else in between. And it's because of that everyone else in between that this works. Because whilst a few of these voters will have voted Liberal and then Labor shortly afterwards, bringing Labor almost up to a winning margin, the vast majority will have put anybody and everybody else in between. And that means whichever freedom-friendly minor party this is, it's in the middle. That means that they get the preferences. And all of a sudden, we have a quota. We have an upset. All of a sudden, thanks to preferences, we've elected a lower house MP from a freedom-friendly minor party. That's how we get freedom-friendly minor party candidates elected in the lower house. And in fact, all we need is between all of the freedom-friendly minor parties to get maybe 30% of the vote, which on current polling is very achievable, and those votes will gather into a single freedom-friendly minor party, and along the way we'll get a few upsets. So that's how it works in the lower house. We could potentially seize the balance of power, where neither the Liberal national government or parties nor the Labor Greens parties can actually hold power in their own right. Maybe we could have freedom-friendly minor parties holding that balance of power. It's very achievable. That's how it works in the lower house. Now, let's talk about the Senate. And here we have it, a hypothetical Senate race, arranged once again in the order of first preference votes. Each marble represents where people put their number 1. Now we're talking about the Senate. That's that really long piece of paper with all the different columns in it. You're obliged to number at least 1 through to 6 if you vote above the line. You can do more than 6, but you have to do at least 6. The strategy for us is the same, even though the counting is done a bit differently. Let me explain. there's actually 6 Senate seats available in each state. So that means you don't have to get 50% in order to win like you do in the lower house. You actually only need a quota. Now, a quota, of course, is just 1/6, so it's actually 1/7. There's some technical mathematical stuff going on there, but basically 1/6 of the votes gets you a Senate seat. So here's how it works. We can see the Liberal Party here already have a huge chunk of votes. Let's distribute those. All right, we can see that the Liberal Party get 1 Senate seat already simply because of the number of first preference votes that they got. We can see, in fact, that they get a 2nd Senate seat, and they even have some votes left over. So they go into the spot according to where their leftover votes are. The number of leftover votes decides where they go, and where they go is going to be just here. So they have 2 Senate seats, plus they're still in the running for another one if they can get another quota. Now we go to the Labor Party. They also have a huge number of votes. That'll do for a Senate seat. That'll do for another one. But it so happens no excess votes. They happen to get exactly the right number, so they go to the very bottom with 2 Senate seats, and I'll say they've got 1 left over, just to be generous. Now these, of course, belong to the Liberal Party. The process from here, because no one has a quota anymore, all the parties with quotas have already claimed their Senate seats. The process now is the same as in the lower house. We eliminate the one with the fewest votes. In this case, it's the Labor Party with their measly 1 vote. They get eliminated. They're no longer in contention for any more Senate seats, but they keep the 2 that they already got. So they've got 2 Senate seats. That's it. Let's assume this person preferenced the Greens. So number 1, they wrote on Labor. Number 2, they wrote on the Greens. There you go. Still not a quota, so we just have to carry on. Eliminate the next smallest. Now this one here, because the Senate ticket is so big, there's heaps of independents and other little micro parties that run. This independent ticket here represents basically all of them. We're going to say that between them, some of their preferences go to the Greens, some of them would have gone to Labor, but Labor's been eliminated, so now it skips Labor and goes to their 3rd preference. So if Labor is anyone's preference now, it simply gets ignored. So some go to the Greens, a few go to the Liberals, and a few go to freedom-friendly minor parties, not enough to actually change the order of how anyone sits in the current standings. So the next one to be eliminated is actually the Liberal Party. They've got 2 Senate seats, but they're getting knocked out of contention for a further Senate seat. So here we have their votes now being distributed. Now, they're not going to, someone who's voting Liberal is not putting the Greens very high on their Senate ticket. So most of these preferences, they can't go to Labor. Labor's been eliminated. They're going to end up going to the other freedom-friendly minor parties just by default if they've put them on the ballot, which in many cases they will have. But we'll talk more about that in a second. So here we have a whole bunch of different preferences being distributed, but there's a few votes here where someone voted for the Labor Party and then perhaps voted for the Liberal Party, then perhaps voted Labor and then voted for 4 other parties, because remember you have to vote for 6, but none of them are left in contention. Those 4 parties maybe were all micro parties that have already been eliminated. If that happens, you have what's called an exhausted vote. These votes no longer go anywhere. They can't, because your preferences, what you write on the ballot, dictate exactly where your vote goes. It cannot go anywhere else. There was a time when parties could send your vote where they chose to send it. That time is over. Your vote only goes where you send it. You write numbers 1 to 6 or as many as you want, and if your numbers run out and all of your options have been eliminated, your vote has become exhausted and no longer plays a role in the outcome of the election. So I would encourage you, when you're voting in the Senate above the line, to really think carefully about making sure you've included all of the parties that you want to include, so that to minimize the risk of your vote becoming exhausted. With that done, now we start eliminating some of the freedom-friendly minor parties. It's just how this particular election, this particular seat worked out. Here's our vote here. Now, of course, these people have watched these videos, and we're going to watch these votes accumulate in the other freedom-friendly minor parties. To be honest, the order doesn't really matter. What matters is that they continue to accumulate within themselves. Let's say this freedom-friendly minor party, for whatever reason, most of their preferences go to this guy. Who overtakes that guy, and most of their preferences go here. What we have now is a quota. In fact, we don't just have a quota, but we've got a quota with a bunch left over. And in a perfect scenario, think about it. A quota in the Senate is actually about 14%. And if there are about 30% of Australian voters planning to vote for minor parties, the freedom-friendly minor parties, which some polls are indicating, then it's actually very possible that we could see freedom-friendly minor parties picking up more than one seat. Whether it's the same party that picks up both of those Senate seats in the same state, or whether it's two different ones, well, it doesn't really matter to me. What we could see, though, is freedom-friendly minor parties picking up multiple Senate seats. So what happens now is we've got the Greens here with a certain number of votes, we've got the remaining freedom-friendly minor party with a certain number of votes, and whoever is the closest to a quota. That last seat, you don't need a full quota. You just need to be closer than anybody else. And in this particular hypothetical example, that's this guy. And so in this example, these all become exhausted votes. They're simply not a part of the calculations anymore. And we have Labor with 2 Senate seats, Liberal with 2 Senate seats, and a freedom-friendly minor party, doesn't matter which one, with 2 Senate seats. Or it might have worked out differently, and maybe there's 2 different freedom-friendly minor parties with 1 each. I don't care. The point is, it is very achievable for freedom-friendly minor party Senate candidates to become elected if we are all smart about how we use the preferential voting system. Please put all of the freedom-friendly minor parties at the top of your ballot, even the ones that you might have some disagreements with. If your disagreements with them are less than your disagreements with the majors, which in most cases that should be, then put them first. That is how your votes are going to be counted in the lower house and in the Senate in the coming federal election. We stand at an incredible moment in history. According to bookmakers, the betting markets, there is no difference between Labor and Liberal right now, which I think is fair enough, because when you look at their policies, there's also really no difference between Labor and Liberal. Why would you choose one over the other when there really is no difference? If you want to get a different result, you're going to have to vote for something different. And in this election, that means supporting freedom-friendly minor parties. Not just one of them, all of them. My name is Topher Field, and I am the Tasmanian lead Senate candidate for the Liberal Democrats. I'd love your support if you're in Tasmania, and if you're not in Tasmania, I'd love for you to support the Liberal Democrats wherever you are. But if we're not the right party for you, that's fine. Please find whichever freedom-friendly minor party is the right party for you and throw your support behind them. Become a member. Volunteer for them. Hand out how to vote cards on election day, stuff letterboxes, maybe put a sign up in your yard. Get behind whichever party best aligns with your values. Put them at number 1, and then make sure you put the rest at number 2, 3, 4, 5, however many there are in your electorate, to make sure that this has the best possible chance of happening and that we have the best possible chance of getting the balance of power in the lower and upper house in this election. Thanks very much for watching. My name's Topher Field, and guess what? Here comes the authorisation.
Authorised by John Humphries for the Liberal Democratic Party, Mount Waverley, Victoria.